Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Today we'll explore a new book by Glendale Mayor Brian Kennedy on how politicians can reconnect with communities they hope to represent. Then, students react to UW-Milwaukee's decision to pause plans to consolidate its multicultural centers.
This is the inclusivity that the students were creating, is the sense of belonging, making it feel like a second home for them. Some of those students put their, blood, sweat, and tears into those centers.
Plus, a journalist who reports on El Salvador shares how that country is aiding the U.S. mass deportation efforts.
Building this idea of not only a safe country, but the toughest one, the one who is able to control any kind of criminal.
All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. As the midterms approach, both Republicans and Democrats are trying to court prospective voters. But a new book by Glendale Mayor Brian Kennedy argues that both parties have become disconnected from the communities that they hope to represent. His book, called It's All Local, explores how independent political candidates have attempted to redirect politics in favor of what voters need, and how political leaders of all stripes can incorporate a bottom-up approach to their priorities. Mayor Kennedy joins me in studio. Brian, thank you so much for being here. The book covers the kind of divide that we're seeing between the national political parties and the communities that they're really hoping to represent. How would you describe what that looks like?
So both of our political parties have been taken over by a top-down approach to how they market themselves. Instead of actually running what used to be traditional political organizing on the ground, where you build communities of interest and those communities of interest have shared values, we've gone to, well, I can talk to the Democratic side because that's the one I'm the most familiar with. On the Democratic side, we have these high-priced consultants who try to put together a branding for the party. They do some poll testing of it. They'll focus group it somewhere in Northern Virginia, and then they ship it out across the rest of the country, and that messaging falls flat. What a group of people in Northern Virginia might think is great, people in rural Nebraska, it doesn't resonate. People in inner city Detroit doesn't resonate. And the Republican Party likewise has a top-down approach, and theirs comes through their Fox News, Newsmax, right-wing podcast medium where they have the same talking points, and it's always about making you afraid of somebody or some group. And so you have these two parties, neither of which seem to know how to talk to people on the ground in a way that's about building something, edifying something, creating community, galvanizing power. It's either sterile, bland messaging that doesn't resonate with people or fearmonger messaging that makes people afraid of their neighbors.
Now, I'll be honest, when you talk about this kind of divide, it's something that I think we sometimes look as a modern phenomenon, that this is something that happened over the last 20 or 30 years. But even if you go back to the turn of the century, not the most recent turn of the century, but the last one into the 20th century, we're really looking at a landscape where, again, politicians are kind of disconnected from the communities that they're hoping to represent. Now, of course, the turn of the 20th century wasn't necessarily a great time to be a Democrat or a Republican here in the state of Wisconsin. One of the things your book really talks about is how you view this moment as a time for independent candidates to rise, which is what we saw in the 20th century as well. What do you think it is about this moment that has made the ground kind of fertile for independent candidates?
We were ruled by elites, at the turn of the last century. We're talking 125 years ago. We were ruled by elites. And if you notice in Wisconsin, we had a very populist movement. You had socialists running Milwaukee, and you had progressives running the rest of the state. And Democrats and Republicans didn't have a whole lot of power here, right? It was basically either progressives or socialists. But there was a disconnect of the major parties because they were the elites in Washington, and they were out of touch with what was going on here in the heartland. Our parties were built, the modern parties were built in the middle of the 20th century, basically by on-the-ground organizing. You had, say, the Flint sit-down strike that I try to use as one of the examples in my book, where the UAW was building a union by people galvanizing in a workplace. You had the Montgomery bus boycott, where you had people meeting in church basements and deciding how they were going to get people to work because nobody of color was going to get on the bus that was segregated. And so we had people talking to one another and building community and building movement. And that's what then became our modern parties, except now, once again, we've moved to this point of we've turned the Democratic Party into a marketing campaign that's not unlike trying to sell cars or shoes or something, and a Republican Party that's a fear-mongering campaign. And so it's really opened the door to a lot of independents. You have 4 independent candidates right now making real headway in their races for U.S. Senate in Idaho, in Nebraska, North Dakota, and in Montana. They're building independent campaigns where they're not aligned with either party, and people are going, yeah, I like what you have to say. Because it doesn't sound right-wing, it doesn't sound left-wing, it just sounds like it makes sense. And they're building their campaigns on the ground with real people who are talking to one another and building local messaging that isn't national messaging.
Now, when you say independent, are you talking about truly independent parties, or are you talking about politicians like Zohran Mamdani, who is a part of the Democratic Socialists within the Democratic Party?
I'm talking about people who are not running with either party affiliation. Dan Osborne in Nebraska is running a very aggressive campaign for U.S. Senate, and he's not a Democrat and he's not a Republican. He is running as an independent, and he is building a grassroots movement. Seth Bodnar in Montana is running an independent campaign. He's not a Democrat. He's not a Republican. He is building a grassroots campaign of Montanans, and he's talking about issues that are important in their state, not what a national party is telling them to do. And we're seeing that happen, like I said, in Idaho, in North Dakota. These independents are really breaking through because people don't want to be told what to think. They don't want to be told who to fear. They know who their neighbors are. They know what the values of their communities are, and they're looking for candidates and for a political movement that talks like your neighbors, that talks about values that you share in common with the people who you sit on the sidelines of a soccer game with, right? That's really what we've lost, and that's what I try to get back to in the book. It's we need to start building community again, and we need to start having messaging that isn't top down. A Democrat in Nebraska might look very different than a Democrat in Alabama or a Democrat in New England, right? And so we can't keep pushing things down from the top. That's what I get to in this book, is that it really is all local, right? If we really focus on our local communities, if we focus on our local values, we can galvanize political movements. There's not going to be two movements on opposite poles.
Sure. When we talk about third parties, they have had some success here in the past in Wisconsin. Progressives and socialists both did make big wins here in Wisconsin. But I'll say, if you really look at those elections, they're winning on slim margins. Some of these elections are only decided by a couple percentage points. And these are local elections that we're talking about. Today, third parties face an even bigger uphill battle. How do you view politicians like Zohran Mamdani, who are, yes, Democrats, but also inside of that movement, Democratic Socialists pushing for other messaging that might not necessarily align with the national party?
So Mamdani's campaign is actually one that I highlighted in the book. I have 8 case studies of different local elected officials from around the country. Most of them I did interviews with. I was not privileged enough to get an interview with Mr. Mamdani, but I did have some connections with some folks on his campaign and was able to get some information from some of them. He built a campaign by talking to voters on the street. He started with a social media campaign of, what do you think government should do? What do you want from New York? What should New York look like? He was asking these questions at subway stations. He didn't have a campaign. He didn't have a platform yet. He was talking to people to find out what they wanted. And then from what he heard from these hundreds and hundreds of people that he interviewed, he built a platform. And that platform then was what he ran on, and it's what people told him they wanted. So he didn't go to the Democratic Party and say, hey, what should my platform be? What are we running on this year? What do the consultants say? He actually talked to real people. And the other case studies that I focus on in the book also bring up other individuals who built their campaigns in the same way. We were talking about the independents. We do have two independents in the U.S. Senate right now, Bernie Sanders and Angus King, both from New England, who aren't Democrats, aren't Republicans, right? They may caucus with the Democrats in the Senate, but they're independent candidates. And I think that we're really at a point where we're seeing more and more of that rise to the surface, certainly across the Midwest. We got the two right now that are currently in office in New England, but the other four running are basically from, the northern part of the country here.
This is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers, and I'm speaking right now with Glendale Mayor Brian Kennedy about his new book. Now, a big part of this book is really about what can be done to bridge this divide, to get people more civically engaged. What do you view beyond, conversations with people, asking them what they want? What else do you view as part of what's necessary to reinvigorate communities and get them more involved in the political process?
Yeah, so the last couple of chapters of the book, because I lay out sort of a history here of like how we got to where we are. And the last few chapters of the book are really kind of a workbook, right? A guide for how you might build community conversations, how you might be able to start talking with your neighbors again. We've gotten to the point where, based on the yard signs that are in people's yards during election season, we know which neighbors we won't talk to and which neighbors we will talk to. The problem is we actually have a lot more in common than we realize. And we need to start breaking down those barriers. So in the book, I lay out how a community organization, for example, could bring people together from all different walks of life and create a series of community conversations where neighbors start talking about what they want to see in their communities, what they think should be different, and building their own political agenda. And then you go to your elected officials and say, we don't care what you say, what your party says, we're your constituents, and this is what we want you to do. And so teaching people how to actually advocate for themselves, how to create community agendas. I think that's what's largely missing. And in order to facilitate that happening, I have pulled together a group of experts, and we're putting together right now the It's All Local Foundation. And the foundation will actually provide small stipends to community organizations that want to run these kind of conversations. We'll provide them with training, provide them with some funding to be able to, hire a facilitator or rent space, and then help guide them through that process. Because we need to start rebuilding our communities again and not relying on the national parties to try and build community for us.
Now, of course, you are a mayor yourself. What have you been doing to engage the community in a more holistic way?
So it's interesting. When I first ran for mayor, I was on the school board, and I had a series of house parties where I talked to people throughout the city of Glendale, and I asked them what they wanted to see differently. Were done differently in the city. And so that actually, I built my campaign, 4 terms ago on that same type of principle of asking people, what do you want to see? And then I built a platform around that. And then I had all of these people who wanted to support me and help me because they'd been a part of the conversation. We actually built community. Now, it helped that I had small kids at the time, or younger kids at the time. They were in elementary to early high school. It was our age range. So I was familiar with people at the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school. I knew a lot of folks at the time. And so I did have a lot of people to tap into to help. But a big part of it, though, was that I was open to not going in and saying, here's what I know, here's what I want to do, you should vote for me. But it was, okay, well, let's figure out what we want as a community. I'm willing to step into the role of mayor and help facilitate or make those things happen. And it's helped me to win re-election 3 different times. I was opposed in the last election by somebody who actually ran a real campaign, knocked doors, put out yard signs, and I still won 80-20 in that campaign because my neighbors, throughout the city, they know me, they know who I am, and they know that, my door's open and I listen. We have a lot of candidates who run for office who don't really get to break through that way. And I believe it's because our communities aren't organized really to be able to support them and help them get there. And so I'd like to see more candidates who run with this kind of a model of I'm here to represent these people and not these people voted for me, so I'm going to because they like my message, right? It needs to be the other way around. The message needs to come from the people, and then the person representing them needs to be their spokesperson and who's going to help make that agenda happen.
All right. Well, Mayor Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect and sharing a bit about your work.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Brian Kennedy is the mayor of Glendale, Wisconsin, and author of the new book, It's All Local, Saving Democracy from the Ground Up. Students at UW-Milwaukee have been raising alarms about a plan to consolidate its multicultural centers into a singular hub. While campus leaders say the plan will centralize resources, students have said that removing specific spaces for Black, female, or LGBTQ students and others will leave everyone less supported. Last month, the university announced it would pause the relocation plan until next summer. Sierra Lee is a junior at UWM who has been organizing against the relocation. She joins WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel to share more about what's happening with the centers.
You shared with WUWM earlier this year that you felt it was important for student centers to have their own private spaces. Why did you feel that way at the time? This is kind of going back to the university's first announcement about the student centers consolidating, losing their names. Why did you feel like that was not going to serve students?
I believe it was not going to serve students as these spaces have been created for purposes known to, students as well as the community. The history behind them serve as to why those centers matter for students. Some students who identify as LGBTQ didn't know who to turn to, didn't know where to go to. And so when the LGBTQ plus center was created, that was created for the purpose of those students who are having self-identity crises or, crises with fitting into the university and having somewhere to go where people who they can relate to are just like them. That's where those centers came to be. Women Resource Center came to be due to the fact that, in a man-made world, you'd like to go and hang out or you like to, be familiar with like-minded women who can actually have a story to tell and actually go and, find a sense of community, find home. Black Student Cultural Center was, for the very same purposes. There was a lot of racism. There was a lot of discrimination. There was a lot of students who felt that they did not belong on a campus where we are at a PWI. It's predominantly white institution. And so a lot of students felt that they needed somewhere to kind of go and hang out with people who are just like them. It's always about building community and building a sense of belonging as well as individuality. And all of these centers have a unique and, identity-based style about them. It's almost like they serve those who are coming in for the help that they need. And that's all that there is to these centers is creating that sense of self, creating those programs and as well as services that are going to fit the needs of those students who identify with those spaces.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. The latest news is that these changes to the student centers are now being paused until at least next school year. Although 3 centers will still be relocated to the first floor of the student union, they will keep their names. That is new. How do you feel about these changes now?
Essentially, if they're keeping their names and they're keeping their services, the programs are still going to remain the same. I don't feel that there should be a need. And as I talked with every other student as well, we all also feel that there should be no need in them relocating, or in a sense, they're calling it a co-location of these centers being moved from the places that they are in now, which is the second floor of the student union, to the first floor of the student union. I know that there are issues of students concerned with ICE, and although we are a public university, safety should be at the top of our list when it comes to serving students or any faculty and staff of that nature. And so students who frequent the Roberto Hernandez Center or Southeast Asian or Black Student Cultural Center don't feel that safety is a focus for some campus administrators. So that's just the main focus is safety, and also the marketing thing, the marketing side of things. I believe that there should have been, if you're trying to increase visibility when it comes to these centers, I believe that your focus should be marketing instead of, okay, we're just going to shift and we're going to co-locate. That is just frustrating to hear that, they're still trying to co-locate, even though the names as well as the programs and services will still remain the same.
Yeah, I want to take a moment to reintroduce you here. Today we're talking to Sierra Lee, a rising junior at UW Milwaukee, about the university's plans to consolidate student centers starting in summer of 2027. I want to go back to something that you just said, just to make it clear for people who may not be familiar. There are student centers that are based in the Student Union, which is widely considered to be a publicly accessible building. You don't need to be a UWM student to go in and out of the Union. But there are 3 multicultural centers, the Southeast Asian Center, the Black Cultural Center, and the Roberto Hernandez Center, that are not actually located in the Union right now. They're located about a block north of the Union in Bolton Hall, which is, although it is on a public campus, maybe not as publicly accessible to people who are not students. And you're saying that if these centers are relocated to a more public space, it might make students more vulnerable to federal law enforcement or things like that, correct?
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct, Katie.
Okay, got it. So do you feel, now that we're 6 months after this first announcement, and now, I don't know, a couple of weeks after this change to the student centers was announced, do you feel like students were heard in this process?
I believe that some students felt that they were heard. However, I do feel that we are not being completely heard out. If students, as well as family, faculty, and staff have ever, visited those centers, you can see why these centers are the way they are. The Roberto Hernandez Center, as well as the Black Student Cultural Center and the Southeast Asian American Center, they have their own spin and individuality and culture inside of them. The Black Student Cultural Center specifically, these students, both former as well as current students who are still here today, took it upon themselves to gather resources from the student warehouse and put silent and quiet rooms together, spaces for students to go and have this opportunity to utilize these centers the way they are and create them to be as inviting. So when you talk about those 3 words of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically inclusion, is a big one that the campus administrator loves to talk about. This is, the inclusivity that the students were creating is the sense of belonging, making it feel like a second home for them. Some of those students put their, blood, sweat, and tears into those centers. They've painted the walls and they put their handprints. So just to co-locate, and when I had my conversation with Chancellor Gibson about that, he stated, well, you all can still bring that, to the other center. When you co-locate, you can still bring that. But then again, it's almost like, but what does that do for the students who've already created these spaces the way that they are? It's a slap in the face, essentially, to the students who created those spaces like that. That's like you telling me, hey, I love your house. Like, I love it so much that I want to, move in it so you can move out of it. I think that's just the frustration of things right now.
How would you respond to someone who says, I don't really understand why college students need these specific centers with their specific names and their own 4 walls in order to make them what they are?
To that, I say look at the history behind those centers, or look at the history in general. I think time and time again, we've seen and noticed how taking away and erasing history can do damage more than it can do good. And I believe that the intent behind these centers and creating them, specifically where they are and how they are today, it makes sense, especially given the fact that we are at a PWI, and a lot of times students don't know and don't have that sense of belonging at a PWI. And so they go and they seek support elsewhere. It's frustrating. It's quite frustrating that you do have some people who think like identity-based centers are not needed. And again, to that, I say, look at the history before you start judging, or talk to the very students who rely on these. A lot of students face severe mental health decline when it comes to something being stripped away from them that is bringing them a sense of peace, bringing them a sense of belonging, and helping them to identify themselves more, and as well as creating services that are targeted for, students such as myself, who's a woman, who's a Black woman at that, or who's a first generation, woman. And a lot of the times these centers are created to build community, to find people who are just like them, instead of having to go and find them, all around campus. You have that space where you can go and say, hey, you're just like me. I'm just like you. Like, do you have this same issue that I'm having? And we can actually connect as one and create services as well as programs to help us to get through these trying times and the difficult times of being in college. And so to that, I just say, again, look at the history, talk to the students, talk to those who are, being impacted and affected by the decisions that have a lot to do with their, place in staying or leaving the university. I believe that, again, when you incorporate student and their voices, it will make a difference. It will make a huge impact. Students will feel like that they're being actually heard and not talked at.
Thank you so much for talking to me about this. I will make sure that I circle back with you as these changes continue to go into effect. Thanks so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And have a great summer, I should say.
You as well. I definitely will.
Sierra Lee is a UWM student and supporter of the Women's Center on campus. She spoke with WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel. Lake Effect is available as a podcast, so you can listen when you like. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, then subscribe, download, and listen on demand. A Milwaukee man's amaretto recipe is in the running for a Good Food Award. We'll meet him and learn about the liquor in about 15 minutes. But first, we'll learn how El Salvador has aided the U.S. mass deportation efforts, and speak with a journalist who's been trying to uncover what's happening to deportees. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. El Salvador has played a key role in President Trump's mass deportation efforts. The president of El Salvador has forged deals with Trump, allowing the United States to deport people to the country. Journalists have been trying to report on the situation in El Salvador, and a prison where many deportees are being taken, called Sukkot. Jose Luis Sanz is one of those journalists. He was in Milwaukee recently for a talk about the deals between the U.S. and El Salvador and what's been happening to people deported to El Salvador. He was joined by Adriana Beltran, the executive director of the Seattle International Foundation, which advocates for human rights and freedom of the press in Central America. WUWM Eric Vaughn Fellow Maria Peralta Arellano spoke with them before their presentation in Milwaukee.
Many people in the U.S. and Milwaukee have been following the stories of the mass detentions that we've seen across many communities, have followed or read in the headlines the cases of Kilmar Abrego, the detention of hundreds of Venezuelans that were then deported without trial, without due process to this mega prison in El Salvador. But there's a further story beyond the Sukkot and the detention that we think it's important to share, as you mentioned, because of this connection between Salvador and the U.S. So we wanted to share more about what's behind the creation of Sukkot, what led El Salvador down this path, and what is that relationship between El Salvador and the United States, and the journalists that have been covering and documenting what has happened in a context where they have come under severe attack.
Because that's also a common thing between Donald Trump and Nayib Bukele, and it's that idea that journalists are the enemy of the people and independent media are not independent, but part of some kind of structure trying to oppose to their political project.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that we kind of wove into these commonalities, starting with the attention to the press and treatment of journalists. But how else can we see some commonalities between Bukele and Trump? For me, one of the most apparent ones, especially most recently, was the use of social media.
Well, also this idea that they are new, that they are not politicians, or that they are the former system, the former political or party system. This idea that they are building a new kind of democracy. Obviously, it's maybe a new kind of autocracy, at least in the case of El Salvador. And I think that's also something they have in common, and is how they play with the concept, how they distort words and concepts to build confusion about what they really are, where the limits of the boundaries of democracy or the sense that the check and balances makes or doesn't make anymore in democracy.
So I kind of want to bring very quickly some attention to the actual prison itself. What do you guys know about it? What did you learn just from reporting and working with journalists? What is actually happening inside?
Only a few independent journalists have been inside SECOT. SECOT is the kind of the original name is Centro para el Control del Terrorismo. I mean, the Contención del Terrorismo is kind of an anti-terrorist jail, right? And Bukele always says that it is not only the most secure, but the biggest jail in the hemisphere. The conditions there are extreme, not only because it was built that way, but because it's part of a whole regime of control in political control in El Salvador. El Salvador has been for the last 4 years under a state of exception that suspends legal guarantees and constitutional protection in many ways. So those who are put in jail in the SECOT or other prisons in El Salvador, they lack of any kind of recognition of where they are, access to lawyers, access to their families, or even knowing the charges against them. Many of them are facing now massive trials where 400 people are put into trial at the same time. So the international monitoring system has talked about torture or lack of health care in those prisons. And honestly, many of them, those inmates, are literally disappear inside not only SECOT but the whole Salvadorian system.
But with having SECOT and having this reputation spread out through the entire judicial system in the country, what kind of pressure or feeling does that create for the actual citizens there?
It's a complex question because one of the effects of the state of exception, it was a dramatic change of the presence of gangs on the streets. And for a population, for a country that has been under the threat of gangs, MS-13 and 18th Street Gang, for decades, that has been a real change in their lives. So many people is thankful with Bukele because of that. But at the same time, they know that under the state of exception, they can be detained anytime for any reason, and they will go into a judicial system where you will have no guarantees. I mean, you will be treated as guilty whoever you are, and without any real capacity of proving that you are innocent. So at the same time now the people are fearing the police or the state itself. And this builds a climate of self-censorship that you can taste and that you can perceive as soon as you arrive in El Salvador.
Just to add to that, the state of exception was started in 2022, I believe, and has extended since then. So the exception has become more permanent than an exception to the rule. But also you have, I believe now, around 91,000 people that have been detained, including, I believe, around 3,000 children. So that's about nearly 2% of the population of El Salvador that is in detention.
Also, some legal reforms that the Bukele regime did allows the judicial system to have someone in jail in preventive detention for until 7 years. So without trial, without access to a proper process to study your case. So again, it's kind of a dark hole where you go into the system and you don't know when or why you will be released.
In your experience and through your eyes, where did the deal come from between Trump and Bukele to start sending deportees over to the prison? How did that develop, and what does it look like now even?
Well, I think it's part of the strategy of Bukele to portray himself as a global player, as a global reference, and as a global leader. So he has been trying to build this relationship with Donald Trump, with other players or political actors like Elon Musk, etc., for a while. And I think he finally found a way to do so. I mean, to be useful for the Trump administration, for the Trump political project. And building this idea of not only a safe country, but the toughest one, the one who is able to control any kind of criminal and keep in jail behind bars any kind of global criminal is part of the narrative of a safe country, and I think it works well with at least for Trump, with the idea that he's taking away from the United States criminals, whoever they want, even if they are not. But this idea that you are expelling the bad seed of migration from the United States. I think that worked well for both of them, at least at the start, because I don't think Bukele is kind of being understood as a... I think people in El Salvador is not really happy with this idea of being the prison for kind of a private prison for the United States. But the idea of a global leader who has deals, negotiates with the United States is something that Bukele has been looking for a while.
For a journalist and someone who supports journalists, what does support look like for people who are working under such conditions or trying to cover things that are happening under authoritarian leaders? What's needed and what changes as things kind of escalate?
Well, support comes in the form of economic support, of course, financial support, but also in terms of public support. One of the things is that most of Salvadorian journalism is now working in exile from Mexico, from Guatemala, from Spain. In some cases, not many of them from the United States, because the United States is not anymore perceived as a safe country for independent journalists or even social leaders coming from Central America and facing threats in Central America. But obviously we need help to raise the voice and to reach more people, more ears and more spaces where to debate this and to build some kind of conscience and political reaction.
And just to add, in the case of El Salvador, it has been journalists and independent media that have brought and covered these issues of what is happening on the ground and have revealed a lot of, what is behind Bukele's strategy at a grave cost, as you mentioned. They've been surveilled. They've had, legal attacks. Bukele has used institutions to go after them administratively, and Jose Luis can speak more, to the surveillance that they've been victims of. But last year alone, you had over 40 Salvadoran journalists forced into exile. And this, unfortunately and worryingly, is a pattern that we see in other countries that have followed that same playbook of viewing journalism as the enemy of the people, something that we hear also from Washington. In places where you have closing spaces of participation where institutions are not working, it is journalists that are holding the power to account. Support means, economic support, that foundations like ours provide, but also other kinds of support, from accompaniment to providing them with other resources, security. We also provide spaces for psychosocial support, because it's also that human aspect, right, of being forced to leave your home, to leave your family, to go work somewhere. What does it mean to work from exile? When you're not talking about a few days, but it can be long-term exile.
And that was kind of my next question. What was the personal cost for you? We had mentioned surveillance, but just what was that experience like?
My case is a little different from the one for most of my colleagues, because I am originally from Spain, so I have an European passport, and that honestly makes a difference sometimes in terms of legal protection or political protection. And also, I don't have family in El Salvador. But for many of my colleagues, exile means letting the families behind or finding the way of reunite with them abroad, whether it is in Mexico, Guatemala, Costa Rica. Is also, in some cases, losing contact with their parents, and it's also hard to feel that you are paying the consequences of doing your job.
Jose Luis Sanz is a journalist who has reported on El Salvador for 20 years. Adriana Beltran is the executive director of the Seattle International Foundation. They were in Milwaukee recently, and that's when they spoke with WUWM's Eric Vaughn Fellow Maria Peralta Ariano. Still ahead, we'll meet a Milwaukee man whose amaretto recipe is up for a Good Food Award. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. Have you ever had a sip of something award-winning? Washington Heights resident Anthony Scalabrino is hoping he can soon offer that to our community. His amaretto recipe is a finalist for the Good Food Awards, a national prize that recognizes excellence and sustainability in craft food and drink. And as WUWM's Mayan Silva reports, he can thank his Sicilian grandmother for the recipe.
Would you like to join me for some amaretto?
Anthony Scalabrino is at his sampling station at Liquor Guys in Wauwatosa. He's draped a large gold and black banner in front of his table that says Oak City Amaretto. And on top of the table is a row of bottles with a caramel-hued liquid inside.
Sir, would you like to join us for some amaretto? It's my grandmother's recipe out of Milwaukee. Do you like sweeter, almondy? It's smooth, not too sweet.
Scalabrino's pitch is enough to nab Nick Malio, who's swinging by the store for some beer.
Give it a shot.
Yeah, please, literally and figuratively. Thoughts?
That's very smooth.
Yeah, and
lots
it tastes
of almond.
Yeah, the cherry
Yeah,
and
cherry.
of carameling up front, and then the apricot and almondy on the back end.
Yeah, very, very nice fruit profile. It's
Yeah,
very good.
thank you.
People often drink amaretto liqueur straight up or in mixed drinks.
You can put it in your Mai Tais, you can put it in your Old Fashions, you can put it in your Manhattans, you can put it in your Tom Collins. So it goes with gin, it goes with rum, it goes with brandy, it goes with whiskey, it goes with everything.
Scalabrino's Amaretto Company is a finalist in the spirits category of the Good Food Awards. There are more than 230 finalists nationwide. He's one of 4 from Wisconsin. Scalabrino founded Oak City Amaretto in 2017 in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's known as the Oak City, so that's where the name comes from. 3 years ago, he kept the name when moving with his wife to Milwaukee's Washington Heights neighborhood. But the amaretto, it came from his grandmother.
What you have here is my company. It's my grandmother's Sicilian amaretto. She made this at Christmas time. You can actually see her face on the side of the bottle there.
Grandma Scalabrino had moved from the coastal cliffs of Sicily to the Midwestern metropolis of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And she had a lot of quirks, including an affinity for polka.
Music was a huge part of upbringing in our family. And besides like the classic rock and the oldies, we'd go to Grandma's house and she'd throw on polka records. And we would dance the polka in her living room.
The origins of her amaretto recipe are a little hazy.
I don't know if she got it from somebody else, a friend, a family, or something, but she would just make it at Christmas time and put it in a bottle for Dad and Uncle John, and they loved it. My dad never drank anything. I maybe saw him drink 2 beers in his life, and he would drink the amaretto after dinner or with friends.
Scalabrino has stayed pretty true to her recipe.
I think she used table sugar, so I used the raw sugar instead. is the only difference, but the proportions and everything are the same.
Scalabrino's amaretto uses all natural ingredients. The amaretto is not aged like a brandy or a bourbon. He uses a grain-neutral spirit, so a corn-based vodka base, where the coloring comes from the sugar, not caramel coloring. The mixing is done locally at Central Standard Distillery. There's a mixing tank with a heater that makes what's essentially a simple syrup. Once it cools down, they add the extracts and alcohol. Bottling sounds a little something like this. An assembly line of bottles gets transported to equidistant spouts to be filled with liquor. The bottles are filled up, capped, and eventually labeled and boxed. Multiply this by about 2,000 cases per year, and it's a hustle, but Scalabrino is able to make a living. Currently, he's selling at grocery and liquor stores in North Carolina and Wisconsin. Did he ever imagine that this would be his life?
Not at all. No. I think I was more built for this than working for anybody else, honestly. I wanted to, so I was a pilot in the Navy for 9.5 years. I wanted to fly since I was 7 years old. Went to an air show in Muskegon and when I was a young kid, and I knew a lot about the aircraft and stuff, and that's kind of what I latched onto.
But even when Scalabrino went off to the Naval Academy for college and didn't really have much time for anything, he made the point to call his grandma every Sunday.
And I'd talk to her for about 30 minutes, and we'd talk about the Lions. I know, boo, whatever. We can both hate the Bears. So we'd talk about the Lions. She knew a lot about them. She saw the 0-16 season. She didn't see the good seasons that we had recently. But yeah, we were best friends, I think.
Grandma Scalabrino lived until age 90 and passed away in 2010, Scalabrino's senior year at the Naval Academy. Did she give you any pieces of advice about aging?
No, not like outwardly, but like that was the advice. Was like, I asked her if like one advice she could give, and she said, treat others how you want to be treated.
I mean, you called her all those years when you were in the Naval Academy, and you talked to her for so much. You made a priority of staying in touch with her and communicating with her. And do you ever feel like when you pour yourself like a glass of this that you're kind of communing with her in a way, or not necessarily?
I think that's a good parallel. You probably give me too much credit for what I'm doing. I think there are moments when I have that. I think it's easy to get lost in life and just like grinding to do the next thing. And I'm the worst offender of not slowing down and appreciating the wins or the things. But yeah, I've, talked to her, prayed to her. You got me tearing up a little bit.
I really like it. It's smooth.
Back at Liquor Guys, people keep popping by the sampling stand, including Linda Tischer. She stopped by after visiting a friend at the Lutheran home and was open to Scalabrino's pitch.
I'll stick some in coffee and orange juice.
Yes. Stone sour. Do a good stone sour. Cool.
No.
Just with orange juice?
Yeah, just with orange juice.
Awesome.
And a little grenadine.
Scalabrino says he's had to do a little bit of re-educating people about what they can use amaretto in. He has recipe cards for pound cake and other baked goods, and says you can substitute amaretto anywhere you use vanilla or almond extract.
Ice cream, coffee, yeah, on your waffles
Pink
if you
squirrel.
want to. Pink squirrel, yeah, that's awesome. I love it. Yeah, we're going to do something with Bryant's, do some special class and OGs of the pink squirrel over there.
And as Nick Malio says as he finishes his sip of the amaretto, along with bourbon, at the sampling stand at Liquor Guys.
Yeah,
well done.
Thank you.
Cheers to Grandma.
Appreciate it.
For Lake Effect, I'm Mayan Silver.
The Good Food Awards will be announced on June 28th. Winners don't receive a cash prize, but can display a Good Food Award winner seal on their product packaging. It is planting season, and before we wrap up today's show, we're going to get some advice on how you can test seeds to make sure they're viable before you begin planting. Here's our Dig In contributor, Venus Williams.
There is a proverb that says seeds have long memories, that seeds will always know what to do. And that's true to a point. We don't have to tell the seed how to germinate, but depending upon where you have stored your seeds and how long you have had them, the germination rate varies quite a bit. The easiest way to test the germination rate of a seed packet is to take 8 to 10 seeds out of that packet, put it on one half of a paper towel, spread them out, give them a little bit of space, but they don't need a lot of space. Fold that paper towel in half so that now you're covering the seeds. I like to use a spray bottle and I spray that paper towel. Then I put it in a Ziploc bag, depending upon the size of the seeds and the size of the paper towel. And then I put it somewhere where it's going to have a little bit of warmth, definitely not cold, but not a whole lot of heat. And then you simply come back to that Ziploc bag in about a week, and that will tell you how viable your seeds are. So out of those 10 seeds, normally for me, 8 to 10 of them will have begun to germinate. That's a great determination of if that entire seed packet is good.
That advice from Venus Williams wraps up today's show. I'm Joy Powers. If you miss any of Lake Effect, you could find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Head Start Early Child Care Centers found that parents are keeping their kids at home out of fear of ICE. We'll have more on that tomorrow on Lake Effect. Thanks so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.